Hello, friends. Want to spend just a few minutes today talking about this concept of spiritual herbalism. What do we mean by spiritual herbalism? What does spiritual herbalism look like in practice? How does it differentiate from other approaches or even traditions of plant medicine? And what are the benefits? What's in it for us is always the end question in these conversations. So spiritual herbalism, first and foremost, is rooted in our ancient unifying spiritual traditions of animism. And basically, what that means is that we approach the herbs of herbalism, the plants that we work with as medicine, as sovereign beings, as fully actualized persons who have spirit, thus the spiritual. So I think a lot of people see this term spiritual herbalism and assume that it's going to kind of veer into this very new agey recipe spellcraft area, but that's not it. Our herbalism is spiritual because we perceive and experience the herbs that we work with as having spirit, as having soul, as having personhood, agency, wisdom, intent. All of the things that you and I have that make us persons, the plants also have. And so spiritual herbalism approaches the idea of medicine in a completely different way than the standard allopathic, reductionist, or recipe-based models of healing. Even within the field of herbalism these days, herbalism has become kind of this monster that seeks to impress and mimic the standards of allopathic Western medicine rather than hold fast to the nature-centered traditions of our plant medicine ways, regardless of where those traditions come from in the world. You go back far enough, they are rooted in nature-centered spirituality, nature-centered life ways. So spiritual herbalism means that rather than focusing solely on the phytochemical constituents of a plant, rather than focusing solely on recipes or formula, and all of that we do because we're not going to deny the power of empirical evidence and the power of what has been handed down to us from herbalists of ages past. But we don't only rely on that. And in fact, when we do rely on it, we look at it through a slightly different lens. And that is that our relationship with the plants is what defines the power. So we, as individual persons, relate to the herbs as individual persons. And in that relationship, we are able to learn directly from them. So we don't have to rely on he said, she said. We don't have to rely on formulaic recipes that have been written for one kind of body, one kind of person, one kind of demographic. Instead, we enter into these incredibly dynamic relationships with the plant spirits whereby they can teach us more about themselves. And it's also an invitation in a more sort of grounded way to study the lore, the myth, the legend, the materia medica, the materia magica of, whatever cultures we are aligned to, in order to glean what the deeper spiritual relationships our ancestors may have had with these plants was. So instead of just cracking open a book and saying, I'm interested in herbs for the respiratory system. Okay, well, here's a list of 10 herbs that are good for the lungs, 10 herbs that can be used for the lungs, right? Our approach is that we understand a certain grouping of herbs has an affinity with the respiratory system, but that's just the beginning. From there, we want to explore the personality, the individual expression, sometimes known as the constitution or the energetic or the humor of the herbs, to see how they will behave when introduced into a human being's unique body. So for example, that list of 10 herbs in any random book about herbalism that are good for the respiratory system, some of them are going to be drying to the respiratory system. Some of them are going to be dampening in the respiratory system. Some are going to warm and stimulate the lungs. Some are going to cool and slow down and solidify the function of the lungs. And these are not terminologies that we see in standard allopathic pop herbalism these days. And that's a problem, because that list of 10 herbs, while all of those herbs may have an affinity for the respiratory system, they're not all good for the lungs. They're herbs that have an affinity for the respiratory system. It doesn't mean that they're the right herbs for any given person. We need to take into consideration personality, body type, spirit, and the disease state, what's happening within the lungs. So somebody exhibiting a very damp and emotional and water type constitution with a cough that is phlegmy and rattly and deep, when we open that book to the respiratory herbs, the first plant that might be listed is mullein. We think, oh, I've got mullein, I'm going to put mullein in this person's body. Yes, mullein has an affinity with the respiratory system, but mullein is very damp and very cool. So you are taking an herb that dives directly into the respiratory system and brings dampness and coolness to an individual's respiratory system that is already struggling with being very damp and very cool. So you, at best, may not really help, and at worst could drive that disease state deeper into the tissues or prolong the person's suffering or just make things worse. So our spiritual herbalism allows us to step back and take in the plant as a person, to not reduce them to one thing they're good at or one job they do, but rather to see them as fully sovereign beings with the complexities that rival our own, and to work with them as such, to honor them as people and to invoke them into our medicine rather than push them into our medicine through formulaic recipes. So, in the modern age, in the contemporary practice of spiritual herbalism, we are ultimately trying to reweave the empirical evidence, the recipes, the materia medica, the lore, the legend, and the myth of our plants and our plant ancestors with our own personal evolutionary dynamic relationships with the plant spirits that we work with. It's kind of a meeting of science and spirit. It's a meeting of tradition and dynamic application. And it keeps the practice fresh. It keeps it relevant. It ensures that we are relying on plants that we have access to, that are relevant for our bioregional space, that we are not leaning into plants that are threatened or over-harvested or endangered, plants that are part of the closed spiritual practice of indigenous people, plants that are primary healthcare for folks who are not part of the standard medical system, for one reason or another. It helps create ethics within our work. And it also makes sure that our medicine doesn't only hit on one level, right? That it's not just, again, this herb is good for this thing. Let's make something happen. Regardless, we talk about, what the herbs do, but we do it in terms of their virtues, their blessings, their personalities, their energetics. So it becomes a softer model with more room for the plants to be who they are. And when we trace any given culture's history back far enough, when we get, pre-conversion, sometimes pre-colonization, sometimes it's just pre-industrialization. And we go back to the point where any culture, every culture, was practicing a land-based, nature-based spirituality, animism, living in a world filled with people, most of whom are not human people. We see that the plant medicine ways start taking on this appearance. They start looking like what we now call spiritual herbalism. It's a novelty to us, but it's been the standard, the status quo, for longer than it has not. So this is ancestral work for all of us. It's a way for us to go back to our roots of good plant medicine and to tap back into our personal relationships with the plants. And for those people who are called into positions of practice, who are called to be medicine makers and teachers in their communities, it's important for us to have the ability to forge these relationships of spirit, these relationships with beings from the other world, because we are their voices to a certain degree in this world. We have to be able to go between our communities and the world of spirit back and forth to talk about which plants are speaking up, which plants are the best medicine for individual people or sometimes even individual times. So all of that kind of wraps into what spiritual herbalism is about. And in practice, it looks a lot like allopathic reductionist herbalism. It looks a lot like individual folks. You know, I can speak to what happens here in my clinic, in my apothecary. It looks like individual folks from my community coming in and sharing with me what they have going on, what they're struggling with, where the issue is, you know, why they don't feel good, why they don't feel themselves, and us dialoguing in a way that really creates space for them to unpack, to really share the narrative, to really explore it from many different angles, and really get a feel for who they are as a person and what their experience of the dis-ease or disharmony state is. If we don't take the time to do that, and we do what a lot of allopathic doctors do, which is hear a set of symptoms, ascribe that to a defined disease state, and then immediately prescribe a drug that relates and kind of end the conversation there. We've all had that experience. We've all had the experience of having a 10-minute doctor appointment, right? If we don't let people fully unpack, and if we don't get to know them, and if we don't share the right kind of space with them, it's very hard for the plant spirits to speak to us, to inspire us about medicine. And it's hard for us to know, again, out of that list of 10 herbs that are great for the respiratory system, which one is actually the best ally for this individual person. You have 10 to choose from, or in my case, 300. You have many herbs to choose from. We want to choose the best. We want to choose the herb that has the tightest affinity, that if we were going to put this person, this human person, and the herb person in a room together, there's a very high likelihood they're going to get on well together, right? We're kind of playing matchmaker in a certain way. And so it looks like a lot of conversation, a lot of sharing, a lot of cultivating trust, especially with folks in our communities who have been so marginalized and so mistreated by the industrial medicine complex. Those are the folks who find the greatest value in this work, because it's the only experience most of them have of really being heard, you know. And in my practice, so many different folks come in and saying, well, this is like the first time anybody's really asked me questions about how I feel about the situation, instead of just trying to get to a diagnosis as quickly as possible. So those conversations are also medicine. And being, you know, in a situation of providing to a community, having folks be able to come into this temple of plant medicine and stand here in the presence of all of these herbs also is in a way a healing experience. And people will often report kind of feeling an adjustment as they walk in the door and settle in. So there's that beauty as well, that it's a ritual of healing surrounding the presence of the plant spirits. The benefits to doing spiritual herbalism, to doing herbalism this way, because spiritual herbalism is a do, not a think, right? It's very much about how we show up, what we provide, what we offer, what we serve with. Is that the healing goes beyond band-aiding. It goes beyond a suppression of symptoms. It goes beyond the idea of just creating comfort, taking somebody out of pain. All of that is important, but that should not be the full stop, right? That should be like, let's do that today, but let's get deeper and figure out the why. You know, allow the plant medicine to come into the body and teach from within, what that narrative looked like, what that pattern looked like as it unfolded from seed to mighty oak. So we benefit because we learn more about ourselves through the process. We take a journey within. We are being taught by the plant spirits directly through the medium of plant spirit medicine, through herbal medicine. And no matter where it goes, no matter where the path goes, because we try to kind of just step into it with, an open space in heart and mind. No matter where it goes, people come out the other side of their plant medicine journey more themselves, more settled into their center, more aware of who they are, more aware of their relationship with nature and the fact that everything that happens is conversation, right? That we don't, at least in my tradition, the Green Art tradition, we don't talk about fate or destiny or any of that. We do talk about conversation, that everything that happens doesn't necessarily happen for a reason, but everything that happens has meaning, right? It is a response from the wholeness of nature. And how you respond is your participation in that conversation. So the disease state, the disharmony state can actually be part of the conversation. And to be able to understand what that means for you as a person can be incredibly empowering. And sometimes it's kind of the key to taking the wind out of the sail of that pattern and changing things for the better in the way that you know is possible, in the way that you know is better for you. So spiritual herbalism is plant medicine based on relationship, deep relationship between the herbalist and the herbs. It is a format of medicine that creates a large amount of space for people to be who they are and unpack and find their truth, and to cater and custom formulate the medicine to acknowledge and honor that truth, rather than having one standard medicine that treats one standard set of symptoms. It is incredibly ritualistic when done appropriately. Now, here in my shop, I'm in downtown Salt Lake City. I see all kinds of folks, and sometimes the best that I can do is send them home with a tincture or a tea and brief instructions on the best way to take that medicine into their bodies. But at its best, spiritual herbalism is ritual. It is a way for the recipient to take the medicine that has been crafted for them by the herbalist and enter into their own relationship with the plant or plants that are present in that formula. So we often teach people to follow the medicine, to take 2 or 3 minutes every day when they take their tincture or drink their tea or whatever the case is, to be really present with it, to listen from everywhere, to follow that medicine as it moves through the body, and to see how the plant teaches from within, because that's really what's happening. If we were to create a hierarchy of benefits from plant medicine, the phytochemical, the nutritive, the antioxidant, the anti-inflammatory, all of that, we would put wisdom at the top. The wisdom medicine is the most important medicine, that when we bring these plant medicines into our body, it is their wisdom that we benefit from the most. And from there, all the other beautiful blessings they bring are all also valuable. But they teach us from within. They lay down new patterns from within. They help us change so that change can happen. And so the benefits are endless. Spiritual herbalism, when practiced well, is not limited to the physical body. We are able to address issues of emotions, mental atmosphere, spirit, ancestral work, narrative, connection to nature, connection to deity, connection to the spirits of place, connection to self. This medicine touches on every level of being, as it should be. So, obviously a massive topic, but I wanted to share a little bit with you about, from my perspective anyway, why the herbalism I practice and the herbalism I see other folks practice is spiritual herbalism and not pop herbalism or reductionist or allopathic. It's important. Now, if you are interested in diving down more into this, reach out to me. Let's talk. I do teach an in-person program here in Salt Lake twice a year. I have a book called Spiritual Herbalism, the Magic and Medicine of the Plants, which is available pretty much everywhere. And lots of classes will continue to come and are already out there to find. So if this interests you, if you're already working with herbalism and you want to go into this deeper space, welcome. If you're new and you want to learn ways that are aligned to these ideals, let's talk. I'll help you find some good education because it's out there. So with that being said, hopefully you learned a few things, are inspired to approach your work with the plant medicine and the plant spirits in a new way. And I look forward to sharing more of this with you soon. Take care.